All right, so today the plan is to go around and climb as many V5s and V4s as possible. And what I want to talk about today is kind of what goes into climbing V5, what the differences are from climbing V4 to V5, how to progress from V4 to V5, how do we make it past the V5 level and start climbing V6s, and just identify the nuances in movement and the strength required, different body positions, different setting styles, etc. So V4, V5 is the theme today. Let's go do a bunch of climbs. All right, first up for this V5 day, we're gonna do this black one. And I think I have already a good topic to start off with this boulder. I think when we're talking about like what a V grade is, typically we try to V grade based on physical difficulty. And like that's how grades are set outside and how setters try to set boulders. Because beta isn't necessarily gradable. But what we're trying to talk about today in this video, I think, is how should we approach V5s and V4s? And in this situation, beta is important and root reading is important. And what I mean is when we're going to this V5, it's inherently gonna be a bit more complex. And so we're gonna have to approach it with definitely more root reading in mind. So if I'm looking at this boulder, I see V5, already my brain should start being to look for more complicated sequences, really make sure I do a full root read of this boulder. Whereas if it's V4, maybe the root reading is less intense. So I think this is all just to say that V5s require more root reading than V4s more often than not. So that being said, let's root read this. Let's just talk about every move, why don't we? So, okay, we have our start foot. It's gonna be a bit of a stand up. And then now, do we wanna go left hand to this undercling? I think so. So we're gonna go left hand to undercling, right hand up to crimp. And then I think I can probably reach the next one using this foothold. And then looks like there's nothing to grab on the last hold. So that means we're gonna have to be in a no hands position. So I can probably bring my left foot up to this foot chip and maybe use my right foot to clamp on this crimp so I can achieve more stability with my hips and then go no hands. So let's see if I can remember the beta I just talked about. Left. I'm going left hand up to the undercling so I can go right hand up to this crimp. And I can indeed reach this hold. So what did I say, left foot up? Okay, I'm gonna clamp. And I can indeed go no hands to master finish. So yeah, definitely would have ran into more trouble on this boulder if I didn't look at it first. So root reading is important. All right, so I was having a quick look at this next V5, trying to see if there's anything that sparked some good discussion. And I think maybe there's something. So for the most part, you'll definitely have dynamic movements on V4s, but I'd say there's more committing moves on V5 in general. And often, maybe in the V4 range, you can kind of reach your way through a sequence. And V5, I often see like a little bit more commitment required when we're going for holds. And so already I kind of see a move like this, where we're gonna highlight this example. So I'm gonna climb up to that sequence and we'll talk about it while we're on the wall. So nothing too fancy at the beginning here. Just gotta kind of have enough finger strength for these holds. But like when we're here, this is what I was thinking. A V4 climber would maybe have the hold here, right? So you can just kind of lay back and static. But I think the difference that's separating the V5 in this instance is I really gotta commit to this next hold. And you have to trust yourself to push past that like sort of static threshold where you can often stay in V4. The V5 pushes you out of it more often, and you need to get comfortable with that when you're climbing V5s. And we're finishing off this boulder. Nothing too complicated. Yeah. So when we have sort of our static bubble, when we're climbing V5s, we're really making that transition to V5. Be aware you gotta start pushing out of that static bubble more often. All right, so I think these two boulders side by side is actually gonna make for a really fun comparison. So we have a V4 slab and a V5 slab right next to each other. And I was looking at them, and I think that they actually kind of have some similar elements in terms of the movement. And we'll talk about those while we're on the boulder when we get to them. Let's start with the V4 and then do the V5. And I wanna talk about, like, just compare the difficulty. And I think it'll be a good comparison because they're so similar actually. Okay, so the sequence that I was looking at is basically when we're here. We can't really keep going straight up to the finish. We have to make kind of a transition around. And so on this V4, the holds are so big, I can even kind of take my hands off, right? I can really just balance around. But I think when I was looking at the V5, it's gonna be a little bit different. So I'm gonna go try it right away. So basically, I think that the V5 here has a very similar transition sequence where we're on the right side of these holds, but we have to transition to the left in order to do the ending sequence. So I'm interested to compare the difficulty. So already, you see there's a bit more mobility required here to really get some weight off my hands. My hips have to be a little bit more open, and I can't really take my hands off the wall. Like you saw when we were making that transition on the V4, I could just really balance, but clearly here on this V5, all of my limbs are important, and it's not just my lower body. And we even have to do another transition. I have to focus up here. So basically, I think this comparison here highlights the time under tension, basically. When we're dealing with the V4, the setters are more willing to give you a bit of a break on your grip, right? Especially in a transition like this, where instead on the V5, they say, no, we're actually gonna give you no sort of respite on your grip strength, and you have to be pulling through it the whole way and focused the entire way through the transition. Whereas on the V4, we could just take kind of a break. So I think, what do we take away from this? Well, we need to be much more ready from our first attempt to be kind of fighting the whole way through the sequence and make a plan of attack and stick to it. Whereas on the V4, we could kind of reassess, play with the sequence a bit more. But on the V5, we have to just be ready to force our way through the whole sequence with no break from the time under tension. All right, so we got another cool side-by-side comparison, an awesome V4 and V5 right next to each other. And the other great thing about these boulders is they are using the same holds, the same line of hand folds. So this will make for a great comparison. Let's start with the V4 and see what we can find. Oh man, after climbing so many V5s, I can already just like feel the relief, like a bit more of an ease in difficulty. All right, let's just straight away hop on the V5. So we have kind of a similar start position here, like kind of a layback, but already I can tell something is pretty obvious. Look how much further away this foothold is versus over here. It's like right under me. You can see how much more bent my knee is. So when we come back over here, because this foot is so far away, what it means is it's requiring me to really core up a bit more and have a much stronger body tension in order to keep my butt from falling down. So already I have to core up much more on the start of this boulder than I did on the V4. Now the ending of this boulder is quite different from the V4, but let's still do it. See if there's anything interesting. It's definitely a tricky looking ending. I should have root read this a bit better. Even like climbers of all levels, I think, can get tripped up on V5 slab in terms of complexity. Okay, this is quite tricky. Okay, so definitely the most obvious thing about the comparison between these two boulders was the starting positions. So I think in general, it's fair to say that V4 The footholds are definitely going to be much closer to the range of your center of gravity, for the most part, underneath you more, and usually your legs will be a little bit more bent when we're stepping on these footholds. Whereas definitely when we start pushing to that V5 range, that's when setters will start playing with feet further away, really requiring you to core up and have stronger body tension in order to use these feet. And so what this means basically is when we start climbing V5 and we're climbing V5 a lot, it's worth it to start incorporating a few more core workouts into your training regimen. Even if we're just climbing around for fun and not even training, it's worth it to just do like a 5-minute core workout once or twice a week, just to really help you be more prepared for these more body tension based moves. So yeah, good thing to keep in mind. All right, we got our next boulder. So looking at this thing, there were two striking things on this boulder that are identifying it as V5 in my opinion. So the first one is we got a coordination move at the beginning of this one here. They'll definitely run into dynos on V4, but I think the biggest difference between V4 dynos and V5 dynos, or dynamic movement in general, is that you run into less coordinative elements in the V4 range. If you have a dyno, typically it's like maybe jug to jug. Very, very rarely are there like more coordination intensive moves. And I think V5 is the range where we really start to push that. And what I mean is this, like we can just watch this move right off the bat. A little hand flip required. There's a lot of practice that goes into like kind of learning the motor patterns for a move like this. So typically you run into them around the V5 range and you'll get more practice with these. Whereas if it was a V4, I don't think we would have our hands flip like this. Maybe we would have sort of a down pull. And now there's less coordination involved, right? Because there's more coordination to kind of unlatch our hands, unwind, and catch another hold. So for the most part, you can watch out for more coordination in the V5 range. And then the second thing that I wanted to talk about on this boulder are these terrible footholds. So look at these feet. They're miserable. I hate these footholds. So we may see these kind of footholds on V4, but definitely less so. When we start getting into the V5 range is where we see more of these just terrible slopey feet. So what do we do about these annoying little guys? So I definitely have some advice for standing on footholds that are super slopey, and I'm gonna go demonstrate it, but first let's talk about it. So when the foothold is slopey, what we kind of want to do is apply some inwards pressure to the wall. So rather than standing straight down on the foothold, we want to apply a bit of inwards pressure to minimize the chance of it slipping. So let's try this move with this foothold. So if I were to kind of just focus on standing downwards, it gives me an opportunity to foot slip, right? But when I apply inwards pressure, I feel much more stable, and it really minimizes the chances of foot slipping. Now that being said, it's always possible to have a foot slip. There's never any guarantees, but that's definitely a way that you can decrease the chances of your foot slipping. Make sure you're applying that inwards pressure on these garbage little slopey footholds. Okay, so this next boulder is a blue taped boulder. And at the gym we're climbing in, blue tapes are V4 or V5, but they haven't put a grade on this one yet. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna climb the boulder, and then afterwards we're gonna try and analyze whether we think it's V4 or V5. So far, I've been really in my static box. I haven't had to do anything too committing. These holds are pretty juggy. I can hang around, make decisions. I'm gonna go with V4. I think I was at one key moment, like where I felt like I was at the crux on these two holds. And I feel like this was the deciding moment. When I went for this next hold, I was like, okay, this hold is bad. Maybe we're in more of the V5 threshold, but I hit it and it was super juggy. So I think that's the V4 difference. But maybe what I'll do is later I'll ask the setter and ask what the actual grade was. All right, so we're looking at the next boulder here, another V5. And already I think I can tell something that this boulder has that this boulder is missing that a V4 would have. And that's just some extra footholds. I think this sequence here, where we're gonna be laybacking through all these volumes and various crimps, the fact that we are now having to play with more footholds that are probably gonna be angled in the wrong direction that we want, and maybe a V4 would have like some push feet to help us through the layback. I think that's gonna be a key difference between like this boulder being V4, V5, but let's get on it and see if that is actually true. Yeah, these holds are a little small. Definitely V5 level. Yeah, see already I'm having to kind of get some drop knees involved, step on volumes on a weird angle. Feet are cryptic. See, I have to kind of step on the corner of this edge here. I think a V4 would just have more feet in that sequence like we were talking about. And then another, I think that was another thing that I think was turning up the difficulty was these holds are pretty slopey and they're like really forcing this layback. I think to make this boulder V4, all these volumes would kind of be leveled out a bit and a bit flatter. But the setters were very conscious that they wanted to up the difficulty and really forced like an intense layback on some slopers and some crimps. Yeah, so that's what I think about that boulder. Let's move on. Okay, so we got another mystery grade. So this one is a blue tape, but again, has no V grade on it yet. So we're gonna climb it and try and figure it out on the fly. Okay, so far the holds are pretty good. The feet are not that slopey. Everything is pretty much within my static range. I don't really have to push past my limit and commit to anything. Now that being said, I'm grabbing dual techs up here. So this hold's kind of slippery, which is maybe an element to consider. This foothold is nice, it's taking a lot of my weight off. Yeah, this one's tricky. I'd say everything about this boulder feels really V4, except for the slippiness of the dual tech side up. That's actually kind of tricky. I could see this going either way because this does add an element of grip strength that's required. I'd still go with hard V4, I think, but up for debate. And of course, that is always the other thing. V grades can be debatable at the end of the day, and there's always a bit of a mid-range. So there are some boulders that maybe just fit perfectly in between V4 and V5 and could be graded either, and we'll just never know. And that's always my opinion is like, oh, you know what? That one's just 4/5 and just doesn't have a definitive grade. So maybe that's what I'd grade this one, 4/5. Oh, hey, that boulder looked pretty tricky, didn't it? That's because it's a V6. I wonder how we get from V5 to V6. I'll have to stay tuned for another video and find out.